So last night, HBO Boxing had their last boxing broadcast, and it was headlined with the #1 pound-for-pound woman in boxing, Cecilia Braekus, defending her unified welterweight titles. At the same time, that was in Los Angeles. On the other side of the country, in New York, ESPN was featuring the best pound-for-pound male fighter in the world. I think the best pound-for-pound martial artist, regardless of fight sports in the world, Vasily Lomachenko, unifying lightweight titles. So I wanted to give just a couple quick thoughts. Of course, I'll talk more about this on my podcast, The Neutral Corner, this week. But there was a lot of symbolism last night. And when you had two cards going at the same time, the two biggest markets in the country, the two true global markets in America, Los Angeles is the boxing hotbed in North America right now, and New York is the old former boxing hotbed. Yet, ESPN, their deal with Top Rank, that's only been going for about a year, they're the up-and-coming boxing brand in America, and HBO is the declining and now dead former undisputed champion of boxing programming. So there's just so much symbolism, man. So in Los Angeles at StubHub Center, that crowd, there couldn't have been 1,000 people there. And to see StubHub Center so dead, so quiet, that was just almost eerie for me to see. You know, I lived in Los Angeles for the last decade, and I've been to StubHub Center a million times. I can't even count how many cards and how many events and pressers and weigh-ins and things like that I've attended there. And to see it just have no energy was almost eerie. It was surreal to me, and it was very indicative and symbolic of HBO boxing and what they've been in recent years. You look at 2018, HBO Boxing had the biggest event of the year, the rematch between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. Now that was on pay-per-view, mind you, but it was still the biggest boxing event of the year. So HBO had the biggest, baddest event of the year. They also had the weakest card of the year, at least on premium cable, quote-unquote big card, triple header of the year last night. So you had the best and the worst, and you just saw the decline. And they went out with a whimper, not with a bang. It was almost kind of sad in a way. Max Kellerman's throat was, I don't know if he's sick or something. He's got laryngitis, but he can barely talk. They brought in Harold Lederman for a couple of segments, which was, Larry Merchant for a couple of segments, who Kellerman replaced. So that was kind of interesting to see. But, overall, look, they were promoting some upcoming shows, HBO, during their whole broadcast, the triple header last night, which had two female fights, which, by the way, I got to say, Claressa Shields looked very improved training with John David Jackson, and she impressed me more than Cecilia Braekus impressed me. I think that, yes, Braekus is the pound-for-pound #1 female fighter because of her accomplishments and her record. But head-to-head right now, I'd probably favor Claressa Shields, and not just because she's bigger. I just saw more explosiveness and a little more hunger and desire and improvement from recent fights, which is impressive. But anyway, throughout the broadcast, they were promoting some upcoming shows. They were promoting this thing called The Shop with LeBron James, who's trying to become some sort of political activist now and some sort of producer, and HBO's doing a bunch of business with them. The same way they're doing business with, Jay-Z and Beyonce and all the documentaries they do. And so LeBron James does this thing, The Shop, and he has this upcoming Muhammad Ali documentary. Ali has been documented 1,000 times. There's been 1 billion books written about him. And what can you say? The man truly was a great fighter and a great activist and did a lot of great things. But he was also a heavily flawed individual. And a lot of those documentaries, damn near all of them, don't explore that side of it, the complications of the man and some of the hypocrisies of the man and some of the dark side, the demons there. And I doubt this thing that LeBron is doing is going to explore any of that. It's a concept and subject matter it's a dead horse that's been beat, past death constantly. So that's all being done under the guise of being in sports. But it's really about politics. It's about political agendas and being quote-unquote woke. The whole HBO boxing thing and the HBO sports thing is more about being woke. And that's the sense you got all night. Meanwhile, over at ESPN with the Lomachenko-Pedraza card, they were promoting upcoming 30 for 30 documentary between the Mike Tyson and Buster Douglas fight, which was the greatest upset in sports history. And yeah, that subject matter has been explored a bunch of times, but never in a 30-30 sports documentary, at least on ESPN, you know, at this level, in this time. So no politics there, complete sports coverage. And of course, everything else they were promoting upcoming, whether it's on ESPN or the ESPN Plus app, and they were promoting a lot of upcoming boxing programming and stuff, or, you know, the top-ranked fight library on the ESPN Plus app, all that stuff. It was all boxing-centric and sports-centric. And ESPN gets accused all the time, rightfully so, of being overly political and trying, you know, sports centers become woke center and all that. There was none of that last night during the broadcast. So you saw one network, which in terms of boxing programming, the trajectory is shooting up, promoting boxing programming, whether it be upcoming documentaries, exploring different subject matter, or a fight library you could go get on ESPN Plus. Or, by the way, all the undercard fights before the live broadcast started around 9 p.m. Eastern on ESPN, all the undercards were on ESPN Plus. So if you had the app, you could see every damn fight last night. That's something you weren't getting at HBO either. And the theater, the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden was completely packed 90 minutes, 2 hours before the ESPN broadcast even started. That tells you how excited the fight fans in New York were to be there for that card. You rarely see a venue, even a small venue like the theater, filled up hours before the main event. That doesn't happen in boxing very often. So two completely different energies in the two cards that we saw. You also, I talked about HBO had two female championship fights, and in between it, Juan Francisco Estrada fought a fellow Mexican fighter from his hometown. They used to spar a lot together, but it was a clear mismatch. It wasn't a very good little man fight. Over on ESPN, you had the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world unifying lightweight titles against Pedraza, who I told you guys was going to go rounds. Don't be surprised if he goes the distance. Styles make fights, and a lot of you were putting way too much weight into his loss to Gervonta Davis, which was at a lower weight. He was weight drained. He's much better with the 5 extra pounds at lightweight. More about that on the Neutral Corner this week. But also, they featured the best prospect in the world right now, Teofimo Lopez. They did not disappoint. Scored a knockout of the year contender against Mason Menard. Highlight reel, Sports Center, right? So you saw the best fighter in the world, pound for pound, and the best prospect in the world. And in between that, sandwiched in between it, was a very good competitive little guy fight between Isaac Dogbe and Navarrete, the Mexican challenger who scored the upset last night and won the world title. So you had a much better card, top to bottom, on ESPN. Much better energy in the building. I don't love ESPN's full commentary crew, but I'll tell you something. I like Joe Tessitore a lot, and Timothy Bradley is getting a lot better. He is much improved, and I think their two chemistry, it's getting better. And I thought they did a fine job last night. Bernardo Osuna always does an outstanding job. Some of the other guys in their crew, don't love them, don't love the work they do, although Andre Ward does a pretty good job, I gotta say. He's part of the secondary crew. He does a pretty good job. But I don't know about some of the other guys. And apparently they're bringing over Max Kellerman. I don't know if that's gonna make it any better or not. So, I'm just looking over here some notes or some thoughts I had. Going back to StubHub Center in Los Angeles, which again, that's the hotbed of boxing in North America, and you had maybe 1,000 people there to see this last HBO card ever, right? I've been at StubHub for small crowds. Robert Guerrero a few years ago fought, I think it was when he fought Aaron Martinez. It was a PBC card during the afternoon. It might have been Sunday afternoon. The place was dead, but it ended up filling in maybe 2,000, 3,000, and yes, a lot of them were comps and gimmies. And I get it, Tom Lawfer don't do that, but a card like that had a bigger crowd than what we saw last night at StubHub. Even the Monsoon, I think last year, or maybe that was early this year, the years are blurring together here, but when Oscar Valdez fought Scott Quigg and ended up breaking his jaw, during a freaking monsoon, people were standing ringside in ponchos. there was a bigger crowd there for that. And it was cold and rainy and stuff for that than there was for the Braekus fight last night, Braekus-Lopes. So it goes to tell you, number one, Cecilia Braekus, you know, look, she is a star in her home country over in Norway. I get it. She doesn't necessarily move the needle here. Neither does Claressa Shields outside of Michigan. You got to build up these female fighters, and you got to build them up in a smart way in the right market. And they got to have big fights before people are going to get excited. I think a lot of the boxing promoters think, oh, Ronda Rousey did all this, that, the other. Oh, okay, but she was built a certain way in certain markets, placating to a certain audience. You got to have that. And also, you know, Braekus doesn't necessarily set the world on fire when she fights. Neither does Claressa Shields. But if those two fought each other in the right market at the right time on the right date, perhaps that moves the needle a little bit. But also, when you have HBO boxing that's going away and it's fading out and they're leaving the sport of boxing, last night, you know, you'd think maybe some fans would show up because of the nostalgia being there for HBO's last fight. They didn't give a shit. More people were interested in staying home. And again, Los Angeles is boxing crazy. You had two Mexicans fighting. I think people thought, oh, we get two Mexicans in the ring against each other, Mexican fans will show up. Nope. People wanted to stay home and watch ESPN and then DVR the HBO card. And I think more people are interested to watch the HBO card to see the little feature HBO did at the end of the card talking about their 45 years of boxing. So I want to talk about that real quick. Obviously, every single fight fan, every fighter who's ever fought on HBO, and even fighters who haven't fought on HBO, every fighter, every trainer, everybody in the boxing media, every boxing writer owes HBO boxing a debt of gratitude. It elevated the sport. But all things come to an end. And you guys got to remember, sports, and especially boxing, it's not just a sport, it's part of the entertainment industry. In a sense that it's not that different than news media, Hollywood, you know, TV, all that stuff. It's all kind of packaged together the same way now. And in that media, you have to adapt. You have to go where the people are. And if you program and you plan and put your programming around Game of Thrones or political activism, you know, left-wing activism. And I'm not saying, you know, left-wing, right-wing, whatever. That's not what I'm trying to get into. I'm just saying HBO has made it very, very clear that that's where they want to go. When you start putting that programming out there, those people come to you because they're seeking that programming. So HBO in the last 5 years especially has dropped a lot of money into left-wing political propaganda and, you know, activism, that kind of stuff, and nerdy Game of Thrones shit, which is the Lord of the Rings with sex, right? The Lord of the Rings with titties. That's Game of Thrones. That's what they're marketing. So those people seeking that subscribe to HBO. If you used to subscribe to HBO for boxing, for sports programming, whatever, you probably stopped subscribing in recent years and you went over to Showtime, or this year you picked up some of these apps, DAZN, ESPN Plus, whatever, or you just became a streaming guy, which a lot of you out there are. So for Peter Nelson, when they announced that they were leaving, to say, well, our subscribership, we've, you know, done the trending analysis and we find that, you know, a very, very small portion of our subscribers care about boxing. You know, more of them care about Game of Thrones. Well, no shit. That's what you've put all your money and energy into for the last 5+ years. So the people respond to what your programming is. It's not because your audience changed, dude. It's because your network changed. That's how this shit works. Cause and effect. If people didn't give a shit about boxing anymore, explain why Showtime boxing's thriving so much right now. They still care about boxing. And Showtime has invested in boxing more and more and more in recent years, and not just on the network, but on their social media and technology platforms. They've picked up a lot of the quote-unquote foreign fights and sometimes just put them on YouTube for free so anyone could watch. So Showtime has put energy and money into boxing, and guess what? The subscribers have responded. If they did trending analysis on their subscribership, a significant percentage of their subscribership they would find are there for boxing, what HBO used to have. Okay? So for Peter Nelson to use that excuse, that's just pure unadulterated bullshit. HBO gave up on boxing long ago. I'm thankful for what they gave us. I'm thankful for all the amazing moments. I couldn't even sit here and go over the top moments in HBO boxing history. It'd take too damn long. But their time has passed. And last night, there was so much symbolism. It was a dark, stormy, cold, chilly night in LA. There was nobody at the damn venue. You had Larry Merchant there, and his replacement, Max Kellerman, couldn't freaking talk. You had all the wokeness with the fighters they had on the card and the future sports programming with LeBron James, who's trying to be the new Malcolm X. You had all this stuff together, and it showed you why HBO boxing has failed miserably. They had contracts with the top fighters that they always put on pay-per-view. The pay-per-view numbers have been declining because more and more people pulled the plug and streamed them. Meanwhile, you look over at Showtime. Now, yeah, you had Wilder Fury. That maybe did 300,000, a little over 300,000 buys. Obviously, Canelo Golovkin dwarfed that. It made significantly more money and significantly more ratings globally. I get it. But the difference is, Wilder and Fury, if they do a rematch, the trajectory of the sales numbers there, the viewership, all of that is going to go up. Showtime's subscribership will go up for a rematch like that. Meanwhile, Canelo, Golovkin, we don't know where Golovkin's going to go. I think it's going to be DAZN. But Canelo left HBO. I mean, he had to. He was probably leaving anyway. Golovkin was likely leaving anyway. So it just shows you one's going down, one's going up. That's how these things work. All right, let me know what you guys think. What am I forgetting here? What am I missing out on? What am I getting wrong? We'll talk more about this on The Neutral Corner this week, so stay tuned. See you at the fights.